All right, so today we're going to talk about the stages of clay. I'm going to have a lecture actually, that gets a little bit more technical than this one does, but I want to talk about the stages of clay, the stages that clay goes through in your home studio. All right, so over here on this side, I have some work that's been fired, and over here on this side, I have some work that's not been fired. The only thing I'm missing here is just a lump of wet clay, but I didn't want to get my hands dirty while I was on the computer or on the phone. So over here, I've got some pieces that have dried. They have been dry for days or months in this case. You can see there's a bit of a color difference. That's because I'm working with two different types of clay. This is your porcelain from class, and this is some other clay I had in this studio. These ones are totally dry, but they have not been fired yet. I'm gonna put them over here with the clay. I've got this little critter that I made a while ago but kept wrapped up. It's really wet. I can still scratch into it. It's a leather hard, or a little bit wetter than leather hard. This is clay. It's leather hard clay versus bone dry clay. I've also got a piece here that I finished a few days ago, but that is still a little bit cold. It's been drying, but it hasn't fully dried out. This is, the important thing there is we're not ready to fire it yet. It needs to dry a few days more, or I risk it blowing up in the kiln. So I'm gonna put that over there with the clay. And then the last thing I've got over here with the clay, and then there's a bag of clay next to me here. But the last thing I've got with the clay is my slip, right? Slip is watery clay, and watery clay is clay. It hasn't been fired yet. I could, I suppose, if I wanted to, dry this out and fire it just as is. And it would go through the same process this other stuff does. Over here on this side, I've got stuff that has been fired. It used to be clay. We put it in the kiln. Now it is ceramic. So we've got a mug with glaze on it, so it's shiny on the surface. I've got some color on the inside. I've got a mug that hasn't been glazed yet, but it has been through the first firing, the bisque firing. And then I have some little stamps. I grabbed them to show the different color. These were a different type of clay. So this is your porcelain, or basically a similar porcelain that I had in the studio. And then these are have also been fired. And I grabbed them because I could bang them around, right? These are stronger than this greenware over here that hasn't been fired yet. So to get you the terms here, we've got greenware on this side. Greenware is clay. Greenware means it hasn't been fired yet. So it's clay that hasn't been fired yet. We've got, I have to read this backwards. We've got wet clay, we've got leather hard clay, we've got bone dry clay, and even the slip. That's all greenware, it's all clay. Once we put it in the kiln and fire it up hot enough, we have fired work. We often call this ceramic is the technical term. It is now ceramic rather than clay. And the important thing there is I can slake or recycle this. I can't slake it all because the wet clay needs to dry first, but I can recycle, I can rework with this, it can change state. Over here, can't slake it anymore. I can pour water in any of these once they've been bisque fired, and they're not gonna slake anymore. So we have two types over here. We've got the bisqueware and we've got the glazeware. So the bisqueware and the glazeware have been through different temperatures. One of them's been hotter. This one's been to about cone 06. Off the top of my head, that's about 1800 degrees, more or less. And it literally is more or less because it depends how fast we fire it. Tells us how hot it needs to be. This has been through a lower temperature firing, and so this ceramic, while it's strong, while it won't slake anymore, it is somewhat porous, and that means it can absorb water, which is good for us when we go to glaze, because we paint the liquid glaze on, and the pot or whatever it is that's made out of the bisqueware absorbs that water, and that's how the glaze stays on. Then we can put it in another firing. Our firing in this class is going to be to cone 6. Oh gosh, I forgot to look up the number. It's around 2100 degrees. It's hotter than this first firing, but not the hottest clay ceramic is ever fired. At this point, it is vitrified. Now, whether it's vitrified or not depends on our particular type of clay that we're starting from. But we are using a cone 6 clay that is vitrified at cone 6. not cone 06, which is confusing, right? It's the same number, but it's got that O in the middle, which tells us it's not as hot. So our cone 6 clay, when we fire it to cone 06, it'll absorb water. It'll be porous. When we fire it to cone 6, it will be what's called vitrified. And that means the ceramic itself has closed up. So it has all these pores in it. It's closed up, and those pores no longer absorb water. Over here, they absorb water, right? Our bone dry pot, if I pour water into this, it's going to slake. You all said slake with me, right? It's going to slake. The water's going to rush into those little pieces, break it apart, and you're going to end up with slip. But over here, I'm going to pour the water in, and it's going to get wet, but it's not going to break down. Over here, and if I pour the water in here, the table will eventually get wet because the pot itself is porous. If I pour it in the glaze work that's vitrified, and the important part here is vitrified, not just glaze, because glaze can leak if it's not fired correctly, but that it's fired up to that vitrification temperature for the clay, and then the clay no longer is going to leak. So why might I want to fire my work? This is important for us to think about in this quarter. Why are we firing? There's several different reasons. And how much you fire your work is going to, be somewhat based on what you can do this quarter and what you want. So up here above the dotted line, why do we fire? Well, these pieces over here are stronger. I can bang on them and I can drop them. I'm not going to do a lot of dropping on these because I can break them, but these are going to be harder to break than this team over here. This team, if I just hit it a little too hard, it's going to break on me. This one had a crack in the bottom anyway. It's going to break on me, and that is something you want to keep in mind. If you don't choose to fire your work this quarter, or if you're not able to, you need to be more careful with it than if you do choose to fire your work. It also means that when you bring it into fire, you need to be pretty careful with it. So that's the first reason. Anything that gets across this dotted line, across this line here, anything that's gone through the firing, bisque, low temperature, or glaze, higher temperature, is going to be stronger. Now, that's for bisque or for glazeware. Look underneath the dotted line. Those things only apply to work that's been glaze fired. So, food safety. And when we say food safety, we mean a couple different things. One is we mean it will hold water, right? So we know that this one will hold water for a bit, but we know that this one will hold water and not get it on the table, right? Unless you tip it over. But this one, if you're drinking your coffee out of it every day, your coffee is gonna end up inside the pot. This one, if you run it through the dishwasher, it's gonna smell bad because the water during, when you're using it and during the dishwasher process is gonna get inside of that. This one, if you run it through the microwave, you can, depending if it's absorbed some water in the dishwasher, it can blow up. So bad news. But this one over here, that's been through the glaze firing, the higher temperature firing, this one's vitrified. You can leave your coffee in, you can put your coffee in and you can drink it, and you're not gonna be, drinking slake. But you can also put your coffee in here and forget it for a day. And what you're gonna end up with is a dirty mug, but not a dirty table. You can run this through the dishwasher. You can run this through the microwave. And as long as you don't have a flaw, like a cracked handle, you shouldn't have any problems. It shouldn't smell bad, it shouldn't break, it shouldn't blow up or anything like that. That's what we mean by food safe. Now, the other thing we mean by food safe is glazes that have been tested for food safety. And if you're interested, I'll show you how you can test for that. We are using commercial glazes, which have been tested for food safety sort of at a large scale. And they say you should always test your own glazes for food safety. And I'll tell you how to do that towards the end. And then, of course, the last bit at the bottom there is color and texture. Do you want your clay to be kind of white and rough, just, I don't know, whatever that texture is, kind of grabs on your fingers a little bit? Or do you want it to be smooth, shiny, and a variety of colors? Glaze is going to get you there, but that's not the only way to achieve that bottom one. So somebody mentioned painting, somebody else mentioned encaustic, and I've got some other examples for you as well later. You can choose, particularly for non-functional work, you can choose to fire at just the bisque temperature And then you can paint it with acrylic paints, you can paint it with watercolor paints, you can, if you know how to do encaustic with wax, you can do that. You can paint it with, whatever kinds of paints you have around. I suppose you could dip it in chocolate, paint glue on it and stick stuff to it, right? You've got lots of options that way. But remember, it will not be food safe if you're doing any of those sorts of approaches. You don't want to paint greenware, unfired work, and then put water in it, because the water is going to get through your paint, it's going to get into your pot, and it's going to slake, right? You don't want to be eating out of that stuff. You don't really want to paint functional work that's been bisqued, because the clay itself will still absorb the water, and a paint isn't really designed to eat off of. Glazes, once they're fired, or the glazes we're working with, are designed to be eaten off of if you choose to do that, and of course if you apply them correctly.